You know, one of the weird things about this episode is the A-plot, if you could call it that. A berserker, hope you cut the reference by the way, probe shows up and it's like, respond. If you're intelligent enough, you'll be destroyed. And, you know, yay, and I mean, I really gotta say, I feel a little bit bad that it took Sheridan the full 24 hours to really pick up on it. But, you know, we had to save it for the sake of the show and whatnot. Nevertheless, I do have to point that out. That's kind of my job here. Even though I love this show, I still have to point out when they do something that's kind of bad writing-wise. And there are two things about this that are bad. First of all, the adherence to the usage of this, the whole probe. This episode has several strong thematic cores. I'm saying that wrong. Has one strong thematic core and several plots rotating around that core. That's what I meant to say. Sorry. And maybe I need to start taking stims. And that's very strong. It makes for some gripping, interesting, character-driven, awesome, dynamic, sitting on the edge of my seat drama. And then every now and again it cuts back to this stupid probe. And with the exception of one line, which ties in the significance of the overall core theme to the probe thing between Sheridan and Ivanova, that's it. So why is the probe even here? It's the same thing I've talked about so many times over on Voyager. Now, Babylon 5 is nowhere near as bad about this, but this is, nevertheless, the thread of the week problem. You know, you gotta keep those viewers engaged with the thread of the week, and blah, blah, blah. Moving on. Second thing they do wrong, though, is, I'm trying to think how to put this. The second thing they do wrong is they present this big threat, and then they only resolve it when it's time for the episode to end. Now, to make that clear, it's not an in-character thing. It's not like they've been mulling over this whole time. It's not like there's been some build-up to a resolution. The whole episode, with regards to the probe plot, all they're doing is it's ceding to its demands. You know, it's like, okay, you want this? Sure. You got this? Sure. We'll get this advanced data. We'll get that advanced data. Blah, 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 blah. And then, you know, when they successfully fail at doing that, that's when, or when they're about to succeed, that's when Sheridan's like, hang on, let me actually think about this problem we're in for a millisecond. And Sheridan calls it. And it really is a berserker in more ways than one. The core theme of this episode is pragmatism versus idealism. It's everywhere, in almost every scene, except for most of the probe ones. It is a relevant and prevalent, and it informs every single scene. I would also say the real A-plot, as in the real primary plot, would actually be about the Narn and their situation. So let's look down the list here. What do we got? The episode bounces between multiple plots, so this may be a little back and forth, forgive me. First of all, I love the idiot's argument right at the beginning. The guy was like, you just want to restrict, you know, the gun just going through a neutral station, because that way you have all the guns, and that way you're a coward. And that's such a dumb argument. I can't even say that with a straight face. I mean, there are plenty of legitimate arguments you could probably levy at someone who's trying to restrict weapon trafficking through a station. That's not one of them. Then Sheridan completely shuts him down. Now, what he did was still risky. There are still plenty of ways that could have gone badly. But he did it anyways, and it's very indicative of Sheridan's style. Sheridan is very important because he's not just the person behind the scenes who can make the right call, the command. He's the face. He has the charisma necessary to be able to inspire others and to show others that he is willing to get down in the trenches, so to speak. In other words, if I was to compare him to any given Star Trek captain, to use a parallel, it would be Sisko, the man who has absolutely no problem walking right down into the trenches and fights right alongside his officers. The man who is willing to show that face as necessary, to play his role as necessary, in order to be the kind of person he needs to be, and not just be the person making the right calls. Hopefully he'll be able to use those skills in the future. Now, I'm going to talk about the Narn in a little bit. Let's skip past that for a moment. I like the nice, down-to-earth, daily stuff that they do. I also like the irony of that sentence, because they're not on Earth, nor do they have the same kind of day concept. But anyways, point being, the nice down-to-earth daily stuff, like them meeting in that restaurant. I can't think of the name of it. They've been there several times before. It's a recurring thing. And I like the whole, let's just talk about this. And they're just chatting and sharing these things. It's, again, I'm just pointing it out yet again. It's another thing that Babylon 5 does really well, is that whole day-in-the-life kind of perspective. But the other thing I like about it is it's a good insight into Franklin as a character. Franklin actually gets some interesting development in this arc. Not as growth, though. This is not an arc of character growth for Franklin. It is a arc of character, it is an arc of character growth for 3 other people I can mention, but not Franklin. Franklin, this is characterization. This is highlighting and developing who he is as an individual and really explaining him. Granted, a lot of what he says under duress, and yet he says it because there is a core underneath that is him. For example, someone else was, I couldn't get a hold of that doctor because he was on vacation. Now to Franklin, that is the worst possible kind of excuse. When lives are on the line, in Franklin's mind, you do what's necessary. That's what he's doing. That is where his stim addiction, and let's be clear, this episode makes it very apparent it is an actual addiction, has come from. Because of the fact that he is willing to do what is necessary when lives are on the line. And he's understaffed and undermanned, and he's putting in extra hours. The idea that someone else is not willing to live up to that same ideal he holds himself to, that's unthinkable. And he goes off on her. The speech he gives her is brilliant. I rewound and watched it again just to enjoy it again. He just destroys her verbally, and I love it. And in all fairness, I agree with him. We've got this thing that's about to blow up our station, and you're complaining that you can't get a hold of someone who's on vacation. It's not that you don't have the answer. It's not that there is no answer. It's not that nobody knows this stuff. Oh, we know a guy, but he's busy. Yeah, unacceptable excuse. But the thing I mentioned about the addiction thing, first of all, props to the actor. He does a good job of portraying both sides of the equation. The bleary, oh God, I can barely go on. The irritability thereof, and the now I'm on stims and now I'm fine. I also think Garibaldi is smart enough to have called him out on his lie. And that's the really tricky part. Interestingly enough, I don't think he had to lie. That's why he has a problem. That's why I think he has a legitimate mental or chemical or both problem with regards to stims. Because he didn't have to lie. He could have said, Garibaldi, I just got through all that crap and I only stimmed once. And you know what? That's progress. It's what he said he'd do. I'll cut back. I'll handle it. It was a tense situation. I needed one, and I did one. And there's no reason to shy away from that. No reason to be ashamed of that. And yet he was. Think about that. He stutters when he says it, too. Next point here. Just a sec. Let's talk about Taan. Now, Talan's awesome. It was actually really good to see him back. And he's a great character. He's probably my second favorite Narn overall. He's awesome. And it was really nice to see him alongside Sheridan. And I love his quote, I've come to repay my debt. And Sheridan says, I don't know how I could deal with having a Narn bodyguard. What would people say of me? And he would say, there is a lucky man who will live to be 150. I love that. I love the implication. I love the dedication. I love the confidence of it. He is probably in what I would call, he's the Worf of the Narn, in my opinion. What I mean by that is, in many ways, I consider Worf to be the ideal Klingon. Maybe not the most Klingon, because as we'll discuss when we get to TNG, there's actually quite a bit of politicking and, quite a bit of backstabbing and facing and politics in general that goes on in the Klingon culture. But the ideal Klingon, that's Worf, in my opinion. And I think Taan is the ideal Narn. Not that I dislike Jakar. Jakar's an awesome character, and that brings me to Jakar. Although before I go on to Jakar, I want to mention one other thing. The gentleman with Taan, the guy he's bodyguarding initially, is an interesting counterpart to Jakar. Again, it's that pragmatism versus idealism thing. The other gentleman, I can't remember his name, forgive me. He espouses the idea of capitulation. We lure them into a false sense of security. We do what they ask so they think they have controlled us. And then we will rise up later. And yet there's two things wrong with that. First, as Londo points out, they're not buying it. He is not broken. And Londo's own comments on that make it clear that he's willing to do what's necessary to make that happen. I'll get to Londo in a minute. The other problem with that is the word complacency. I know this is a Narn, an alien we're talking about, but forgive me. Human beings are very adaptable. It is arguably our most defined trait. If you are in pain in a specific way every day at the same time, you get used to it. I should know. To this day, I wake up in pain, thanks to my issues I had several years ago. There are possible surgeries that could fix that for me, but that's really, really expensive and is nowhere near possible right now. You get used to it. It gets to a while. I mean, you still lament it when it happens, but then you just move on and you accept it. You become complacent towards it. Now, whether that's a good or a bad thing is going to depend on the individual circumstance. But again, they're talking about rebellion in the future, probably years in the future. How many years do you think it would take for the Narn to become complacent if they were actively trying to be? If collaborators like this gentleman were trying to get them to see the Centauri side of view? To lap up the crumbs like a good little dog. That is a very real danger. I'm not going to get into the real-life politics of that. That's a very, very, very volatile topic. Let's just say that we here in real life have had that problem many times in history, and let's just leave it at that. I mentioned Taan. I actually, by the way, this is funny. This is my page of notes. I don't know if you can see it. It's like a full page of notes for this episode. This little scrawl up here is all I have to say. It's just in the margin. It's all I have to say about the probe plot. I have nothing else to add to that. Londo has some character growth in this episode. It's also some character development. I mean, Lord knows, Londo has made clear more than once that he does genuinely care for Veer. That's not new. What is new is the fact that he has started to recognize a truth that he has been unable to avoid up until now. This is that pragmatism and idealism thing again. By the way, pragmatism is just one step away from cynicism, and cynicism can go to some very dark places. Listen to the voice of Peter Jurassic. When he's talking to the Narn, he is the Centauri. The moment he leaves, he drops it, and there's this note of just weariness in his tone. His tone is completely different seconds later, once he's away. Think about that for a moment. Think about how dark Londo has already become, and how much darker he is willing to become, if it means, as he himself says, ensuring that the Centauri never go through this again. All this horrible, terrible crap he's gone through because he believes he must, because he genuinely cares about his people, and because he wants the Centauri to actually be great again. Now, that's horrible, really. Don't mistake me. I say Londo's my favorite character, and I think part of that is because I believe underneath all that mess there is a good man there. That's part of it, though. But a good man can be... don't mistake me, I like good characters. Londo is not a good person. This sounds like I'm contradicting myself, but what I mean is I'm not excusing Londo's actions. I'm not trying to say, oh, he was just doing what he thought was best. I'm not trying to apologize for the horrible atrocities Londo has allowed to happen and will continue to allow happen. That's not the point. There's enough complexity to the character that despite being a good man underneath all that exterior, he is still willing to do horrible things for his own reasons that are complicated. He is not black, nor is he white. He is a complex character. We see that in this episode many times. His interactions with Veer, of course, show that in many ways, but I think it's best expressed when he interacts with Delenn. He starts off like in full Centauri mode. And then about a sentence into it, you just feel it sort of deflating until he just starts kind of being himself. He drops the uniform for a bit for her and is like, okay, yeah, let's talk. I need a favor. And then she's like, why? And he immediately pulls the uniform back up. Oh, it's a good career move and blah, 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 blah. And she says, thank you. And now the truth? I love that line. And then he just pauses a moment. He doesn't actually say the truth. He implies it. But he does admit he cares about Veer. And he does all but say Veer needs to get the hell away from this. That he believes Veer is an idealist. And that idealism should be protected, nurtured, cared for, and put far away from all the dark, horrible things the Centauri Republic are doing now and will do in the future. And that Londo himself wants to distance himself from Veer. Not because he doesn't value the man. Not because he doesn't value his company. This is a man who threatened to quit if Veer had not actually stayed. No. He's doing it for Veer's sake. This is an interesting take on the idealism versus pragmatism thing. Because in this case, the pragmatic is trying to protect the idealist from ever becoming pragmatic. He doesn't want Veer to become like himself. He has this beautiful line. He reminds me of myself before... And then he just kind of cuts it off. And we never find out what's after that, but we don't need to. Londo's already done this before, actually. My shoes are too tight, and I've forgotten how to dance. He knows that there is idealism in the world, in the universe, and he cherishes it, and he's willing to try and protect it and help it. But he is such a hard cynic at this point that he thinks there could never be anything so good for himself anymore. That these horrible atrocities must happen, and they must be on his back, and that's why he wants Veer over there. Everything that I've explained about Londo could be summarized by his one brilliant exchange with Veer. Veer says, "But Londo, you'll be alone." And Londo says, "Bah, I have always been alone." Londo thinks he's gone past the point of redemption. Now, for those of you watching this show with me, I have a very serious question for you. Do you think Londo can be redeemed, as of now? After all that's happened, not knowing what will come, not knowing if it will be better or worse, do you think Londo is redeemable? Because he doesn't. Then we get to Jakar. The Narn are in a very tricky situation here, because the Narn have to decide between pragmatism and idealism. They have to decide what's more important to them. One thing I like is the episode doesn't definitively say which is correct. It doesn't say, this is the right choice. I hate it when something preaches at me or tells me what is right. It says, these are the two choices. The characters may decide for themselves, but in the end, we get to decide for ourselves which is correct. So which is correct for the Narn? Do we capitulate? Do we grow complacent? That is the pragmatic choice. We get food and we get clothing. We get survival at the cost of living. And yet, it's not that black and white, is it? Because if we resist, we lose survival. And remember, and I've said this so many times, while survival means nothing without living, living cannot exist without survival. You can't live if you don't survive. In other words, if you die. So, is it worth death, pain, suffering, to hold on to an ideal, to hold on to a concept or a thought, to be free? That's not for me to decide. That's for you to decide. Every individual gets to decide that for themselves, to some extent or another. That is the path the Narn are on right now. Now, Jakar, he makes his decision pretty much like that. I will not allow my people to suffer on my behalf. I will submit. I will surrender. His people have to beg him repeatedly in order to stay, to continue to be leader of the resistance. This is how Jakar's character is beginning to move even further. He's already been a leader. He's already won the hearts and minds of his people. But now he is starting to win their souls. These are people who have been inspired by him, have been taught by him, have been uplifted by him, and are willing to endure hardship for him. And this will continue in the future. This is the arc Jakar is now passing on. Because this is not an easy choice for Jakar. He's not the kind of man who would say, oh yes, others are suffering elsewhere, but I'm comfortable. That's not the kind of person he is. He knows that if he went back, he would die. Garibaldi begs him to stay for that. And I like that touch, by the way, showing that Garibaldi has slowly grown closer to Jakar thanks to Jakar's change in character, and thus showing Jakar as becoming more welcome on the station, too. But the thing I really love, Jakar staying is worse for him. He doesn't get the peace of death. He doesn't get the burden lifted from his shoulders. No, he gets to keep carrying that burden. He gets to keep knowing that there are people suffering for his freedom. He gets to know that he can't stop. He can't let himself grow complacent. He can't let himself down. He has to constantly try to the furthest extent of his abilities because there are good people suffering and dying for his freedom. He has more weight on his shoulders now than he did before. And that's the complexity of his character. Showcasing that he is not a good guy, a bad guy, but that he is a complex, well-written, well-presented, brilliantly acted character. God, I love this show. Let me check my notes. Do I have anything else to say here? No, I think that is everything. Pragmatism versus idealism. Who wins in the end, huh? Wow, it's only been... I look at my clock at the end of these and I'm like, wow, I've only been talking for a little bit of time. I really hope you guys don't hate me. There's this weird bias amongst my viewers that longer episodes are a mark of quality, that for some reason that's a thing, and I don't like that. Usually my longer episodes tend to be ones where I have a lot to complain about, or a lot to diverge about, or whatever. I mean, the recent Unimatrix Zero episode, which I think is going live last week? I'm not sure, relative to you guys, relative to this episode. I had a lot to say in that one. Regardless, I beg your indulgence for only talking until I have run out of things to say, and I'll continue to do the best I can for you. See you next time, guys.
you.